What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. Power creep, or when things introduced to a game over time grow in power compared to the original parts of the game, is a surprisingly prevalent aspect of League of Legends that has shaped the meta quite a bit. Let's get started. It's important to note that when I talk about power creep in this sense, I'm referring to new changes in general, so it can be a new champion coming out, or perhaps an older champion receiving a significant rework or update. As well, power creep in League is a bit different to how it occurs in other games, and it works like this. League doesn't really operate on a system of numbers and values that can be directly compared since each champion is so different. They all have their own unique mechanics that act differently in different situations. And so power creep does exist, but in a way where the new stuff coming out has more applicable or more consistent mechanics rather than actually having stronger numbers. So it's not so much of a power creep that takes place, but rather a utility creep. By making newer kits more complex, you essentially give them more tools to work with and more options and versatility, and thus more power in terms of utility. For example, if you give a champion a dash, it will give them a cool component to their kit. However, you've just made every skill shot reliant and dash-less champion weaker in the meantime because their mechanics won't be able to match up as easily. And the fact remains that quite a few champions in the game fall victim to being outclassed, meaning that that champion does not get played in favor of another champion because they do the job better in almost every single way. And this concept of being outclassed is a big one because it's the main reason why a large majority of champions are underplayed in the competitive scene. To give you a more specific example, I was watching Froggen's stream and he explained why Anivia doesn't get played in the competitive scene right now, and it mainly comes down to her getting outclassed by other champions. Anivia plays a control mage playstyle and used to be one of the strongest mid lane champions in the game, but there is little reason to pick her now over someone like Victor, who is a benefactor of this power creep due to his more recent champion rework, who plays the same control mage style, but has better wave clear, lower mana costs relative to the damage output, and more reliable damage. And as it so happens, Victor is one of the strongest mid lanes in the game right now, while Anivia goes mostly unplayed. So we have to think, why do we see this utility creep occur? First off, it's worth noting that any kind of creep is likely to occur in any game that experiences constant changes, simply because new content that is made takes into account old content that already exists, while on the other hand, the older content was usually not made with the future content in mind. And it happens in League specifically because Riot wants to make the newer champions have more exciting or complex kits. Imagine if the new champion came out had a kit like Warwick's. Two of the abilities are practically passives and the other two are targeted and very simple mechanically, and so he's a really basic and easy to play champion, and that makes his kit uninteresting for the players and would honestly be a huge flop if released today, and so is the kind of champion Riot would not want to release since he wouldn't really sell that well. Riot gets the direct benefit of being able to sell more of the champion and its skins if the kit is interesting and exciting, and it's fairly obvious that making new champions have more utility is something that Riot definitely does to sell the latest champion. And to be fair, it works, since the average player is more likely to buy a champion that is more interesting. The last champion Riot released who you could objectively consider to have a mechanically simple, low utility, and overall uninteresting kit was arguably Maokai, who was released about 4.5 years ago in February 2011. But honestly, I think this utility creep is pretty much okay, since the game has such a large element of skill involved to it that these more exciting and interesting and more complex kits tend to be reasonably harder to play, and so the power creep tends to not really be noticeable for the solo queue meta and only really applicable to the highest level of gameplay, at least most of the time. However, when it comes to the competitive scene, it is actually quite noticeable, as with a larger pool of champions available, you'd think it'd become easier to innovate the meta and to create new strategies, since you have more champions as a whole available for you to work with, and while that might be true for solo queue, in the competitive scene, it is actually the complete opposite. If you take a look at the table on the screen, you can see that up until the most recent NALCS split, the number of champions played in the game has gone down pretty much every single split, despite more and more champions being readily available to the game. And it seems crazy, but the reason for this is because as you introduce more champions into the game, more and more existing champions are likely to get outclassed by the new meta champions and fall victim to this utility creep. This happens because there's only a limited number of playstyles a champion can play in League, such as control mages, assassins, tanks, supports, etc., and new playstyles are not being introduced due to the way the meta is so heavily refined. So every champion that gets introduced becomes direct competition for a certain playstyle, and if it is strong, suddenly outclasses and makes a large number of champions obsolete. And so overall, I think League suffers from the problem of a lot of champions in the game being outclassed by others. But the thing is that although a lot of champions have similar styles of play, every champion in the game does have something that is unique to their kit. So every champion always has some reason that their utility might be better than others. So it's just all about how consistent and how relevant their utility is to the current meta. A couple changes and the champions that are popular can change completely due to their mechanics becoming more or less relevant. And at the same time, buffs and nerfs also serve as a direct form of combating the creep by making a champion objectively stronger or weaker. And both power and utility creep can happen to champions that already exist in the game through the form of a buff. And to be fair, buffs are a great way to combat the utility creep, since a champion with fewer mechanical options or with an outdated kit can gain some raw stats to make up the difference. And it's only fair, since someone with kit disadvantages deserves to deal or be able to tank more damage. So overall, power creep affects League a ton, since selling new champions and their skins is a huge part of Riot's business model. However, they work to constantly combat this through consistent patching and balance updates. With this balancing, they also manage to keep older champions relevant, allowing them to keep selling as well, albeit at a lower rate. So in the end, Riot wins by quite a lot, and the players get a lot of really fun and unique champions. So, what do you think about power creep in League? Leave a comment and let me know. And that just about wraps it up. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to tap that like button to help support me, as well as you could check out some of the other videos on the screen too. Definitely subscribe for some more awesome content in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.